President-elect Donald Trump gave an impromptu press conference in Mar-a-Lago this afternoon and covered a whole range of topics. He really was quite chatty today, talking everything from the Russia-Ukraine war, the expectations of negotiations, and then talked a little bit about Iran, about the Panama Canal, Greenland, the Gaza situation, and a number of other things here. Really just kind of a tour de force across the foreign policy bow, so to speak, to kind of give us an idea of what we can expect coming in. And as Gary and I were discussing before we came on the air today, it's like, man, you better buckle up, because this is not going to be your grandma's presidency, so to speak. And it's not even going to be really like the first Trump term, because you just imagine when he came in there, by all accounts, he didn't expect to win and was as surprised as almost anyone. And so hadn't really had a really good plan on what to do as president. And so he was kind of figuring a lot of it out on the fly and got, kind of a slow roll. Well, this time he definitely has a better idea of what he wants to do. He is unconstrained about having to worry about running for a second term. So he doesn't have to worry about the normal things that a new president would have coming in about, whether or not he's going to be popular enough, and has to avoid upsetting any particular constituency because they may not vote for him next time, et cetera. So it's going to be a kind of a freewheeling deal. And I'll just tell you, I'll just set the stage for you here, that there's some stuff that's kind of out there, is what he's saying on some of these topics. And, it's always trying to read the tea leaves with President Trump to try to figure out, what is he saying that he actually means. It's a signal to what he intends to do. And then how much of it is hyperbole, that is just trying to, the shock value to get people to, promote what he's talking about, that he's, he got that businessman's mind on, and he's trying to, in a sense, negotiate something that's coming up. So he's going to put a big opening position out here if he really wants it back here, and then he'll roll it back, etc. Or does he actually mean this? That's what everybody's trying to figure out here. And you're going to see really quite a number of things that we talk about here today. But I want to start with kind of what's really the most consequential anyway. And that is in terms of what's going to happen with the Russia-Ukraine war. Now, Trump, one of the big reasons he even won the election at all is because he said he was going to, quote, end the war in one day if he won. Quite in contrast to Kamala Harris, who was basically just going to continue the status quo of the Biden administration and provide security or ammunition for Ukraine for as long as it took. They never said as long as it took to what, but that was the deal. So the voters said, yeah, we're not in on that. We're out on this whole for as long as it takes things. We want this war to come to an end. We're tired of our money going into a deep hole that has no benefit for our country, et cetera. So now Trump is being asked, okay, and what are you going to do about this now? Okay, so here he is now, less than 3 weeks out from coming in. And I think that was one of the reasons why so many people are following this press conference today, because it's getting close to the time when he's actually going to have command authority, not just giving his opinion on some things. So one of the key aspects of what kind of deal, what kind of negotiated end to this war could be wrought is going to center on NATO membership for Ukraine. Now, just as a brief reminder, really, all the way back to 2008, when NATO first formally said that Ukraine would be eventually admitted into NATO. That's kind of what started the countdown clock for the war that started here in 2022. And there was all these warnings given by the Russian side that that's a red line for us. There was all these ignoring statements by NATO, all the way up to just right before the war started, when Jens Stoltenberg, then the Secretary General for NATO, said, yeah, I don't care what you think, Russia. Nobody tells us who does or doesn't come into it, and Ukraine is coming into NATO. And of course, we all know what happened after that. So now then the question is, with Trump coming in, what is his position going to be on NATO? And he had some very interesting comments on that point.
So, a big part of the problem was Russia for many, many years, long before Putin said you could never have NATO involved with Ukraine. Now, they've said that that's been like written in stone. And somewhere along the line, Biden said, no, they should be able to join NATO. Well, then Russia has somebody right on their doorstep, and I could understand their feeling about that. But there were a lot of mistakes made in that negotiation. And when I heard the way that Biden was negotiating, I said, you're going to end up in a war. And it turned out to be a very bad war. And it could escalate. That war could escalate to be much worse than it is right now. They can never join. Well, my view is that it was always understood. In fact, I believe that they had a deal, and then Biden broke it. They had a deal which would have been a satisfactory deal to Ukraine and everybody else, but that Biden said, no, you have to be able to join NATO.
I think that what he's referring to in that last part was the Minsk agreements that he said everybody had agreed to, that there wouldn't have. Minsk agreements never had any provision for NATO at all. That was a completely separate issue. I think that that is a real shot across the bow to Zelensky to say, hey, you need to understand something. I get it. I understand why Russia would feel this way to have NATO on its borders. So when you have Zelensky who's saying that, that's what we want. We want NATO membership. We think that's our security guarantee that you're going to give to us. Then you can see that there's going to be some real problems here. And we showed you, I think, just a couple of days ago in the Lex Friedman interview that Zelensky seems to think he is going to get NATO.
To make it clear, let's describe the idea that you are speaking about. I would like to offer you other ideas too, but right now, your idea is that NATO accepts Ukraine minus the 5 regions of Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhia, Kherson, and Crimea.
Just so you understand the situation, the invitation to NATO is legislatively issued to Ukraine. So to us, all those territories are still Ukraine. But NATO so far can only act in the part that is under Ukrainian control. This can be negotiated. I am sure about that. Yes, this would not be a great success for us, but if we see a diplomatic way to end the war, this is one of the ways.
Yeah. If we see a diplomatic way to end the war in NATO, this is one of the ways. And listen, I totally get it from his perspective. From Zelensky's perspective, I guarantee 100% certain, if I were in his shoes, I would be doing everything in my power to get a NATO membership, because I would recognize that the balance of power is irrevocably in Russia's favor, can never be moved into my favor. And so the only thing I could ever do to prevent, a future incursion would be to have the backing of 32, big friends behind my back there. And that's fine from Ukraine's perspective, but Ukraine isn't the only perspective that we have to consider. And Trump is thinking of the American perspective first and foremost, above Ukraine, above Europeans. It's definitely America first. It's not just a bumper sticker. He actually means that. And so everything is through the lens in his eyes of what is in the benefit of the United States. And you can be very clear. I think he was very clear on his announcement there that this is something that he would view differently. He would view the same way as Russia does, should the foot shoe be on the other foot, and it's the United States that was worried about, say, a Russia or a China having some kind of a military alliance with a Mexico or a Canada, something to that effect. Obviously, he would not be willing to let that happen at all. And so you heard him say, I understand. And you also heard him say, I thought that there was already a deal in place that this wouldn't have happened. And if they had stuck with that deal, there wouldn't have been a war in the first place. In my view, there is no chance, and I mean zero, not a tiny one, not a fraction, but zero, that Trump would say all those things and clearly believe them, and then have some kind of even an attempt to have NATO membership be given to Ukraine in negotiations. So Zelensky and everybody else needs to understand that is off the table, even from the theoretical possibility of Trump. So then the question is going to be next, if NATO's not going to be part of this, what is going to be part of this? And Trump also talking in this press conference about going to Russia and talking to Vladimir Putin in a negotiation.
I know that Putin would like to meet. I don't think it's appropriate that I meet until after the 20th, which I hate, because every day many young people are being killed, soldiers. The land is very flat. And hundreds of thousands of soldiers many hundreds of thousands from each side are dead. And they're laying in fields all over the place. Nobody to even collect. There's landmines all over. It's a disaster. But it's very flat. It's great. It's farmland. And it's very, very flat. And the only thing that stops a bullet is the human body. And the human body is stopping a lot of bullets.
Within the first 3 to 6 months?
I hope to have 6 months. No, I hope long before 6 months. Look, Russia's losing a lot of young people, and so is Ukraine.
So you see there that he is genuinely animated, even from a humanitarian perspective, just from a human perspective of wanting the suffering on both sides to end. That's motivating him to want to get this done. And on top of any kind of national security issue, I think it's pretty clear that President Trump sees that there is no national security imperative for the United States that a continuation of this war would serve. But there is a significant benefit to the U.S. to ending this war quickly. You heard him say during that clip, or maybe the one before that, where he just said, look, this could escalate. Yeah, the first clip there, he was talking about the NATO issue. He said it could escalate. That's one of the reasons he thinks that the war should have been fought in the first place. He has said many times that had he been in office during the 2022, that he doesn't believe there would have been a war. I think he's probably right, because what I've told you, I've heard from a diplomat who has some knowledge about the situation, that in June 2021, when Biden met with Putin, Putin allegedly told the president that if you continue to press ahead with NATO membership for Ukraine, we will use force. And of course, he said that when they had somewhere around 100,000 Russian troops around Ukraine at the time. So it was not just a musing comment, but something that had some teeth into it. And Biden allegedly said, yeah, whatever, do whatever you want to do. We'll sanction the hell out of you and we'll destroy your economy, and all the stuff that he said after that. We know from Jens Stoltenberg that certainly he admitted, I think it was in December of 23, that Putin told NATO, if you persist, we're going to go to war. But if you don't, there won't be any war. He said that was the trigger. Stoltenberg admitted that was the trigger. So I think when Trump says that if I had been president, there wouldn't have been one, I think there's some justification to that, because he would have made some kind of accommodation, because he doesn't want war. You see, Trump's modus vivendi has always been, he likes to be tough, and he likes to sometimes fire off missiles like he did in Syria, et cetera, like he took out Soleimani with an assassination, took some risk there. But you see, when it comes to war, he's not about that. He's about avoiding or ending wars. And so I think that especially on something like this, he correctly recognizes that it is nothing but potential destruction and devastation if the United States ever got into war with Russia. And I don't think there's any chance that he'll do so unless Russia directly attacks the United States for some reason that can't even be foreseen at the moment. Short of that, I don't think that he's going to. So he's going to want to get this war over with. Putin, for his part, has also said, yeah, sure, I'd be happy to meet with him.
I don't know when we meet, because he doesn't say anything about this. I have not spoken to him for more than 4 years, but I'm open for it anytime. I'm open for a meeting, for a summit.
And we've also had several other Russian officials, from Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister, to Dmitry Peskov, their Kremlin spokesman, that says, yes, the Russians are willing to talk without preconditions anytime. But there are some limitations and there are some provisions that have to be taken into consideration whenever they meet to talk. No preconditions to talk, but you need to understand before you get to the table that there are some things that we require. And one of the things, and I won't show it now, we've talked about it many times, is on June 14th, Putin laid out that he has to have all four of the areas that were the oblasts that were annexed by Russia in 2022. There has to be no NATO, non-nuclear status of what's left of Ukraine, the part that they don't have control over. And there has to be the, quote, denazification of the regime. That part's always been unclear what they actually mean by that. There's a lot of different interpretations. The rest of it's fairly straightforward. Some of it's literally on the map and it's easy to figure out. But he says that's his beginning position when he comes in there. Well, Trump's emissary, retired three-star General Keith Kellogg, has been Trump's designated guy to do these negotiations. He was supposed to have gone to Ukraine and then to several European capitals to talk about the potential plans. And it was announced today that has been canceled, that he is not going to be going anytime before the inauguration. Now, that has raised a number of eyebrows because people are wondering what that means, because it doesn't seem like there was any real meaning behind going in the first place other than to begin conversations and discussions, et cetera. But it could also indicate that Trump is concerned about, okay, we have some really big divergences on the inside about what we're even going to attempt to do with Zelensky. You just saw there in the Lex interview, I mean, his entry level understanding is we're going to be giving NATO in this part, and then we'll figure this other stuff out later. And Trump is already saying, yeah, that ain't going to happen. There's not going to be any NATO. So if Zelensky's first part is already off the table, then we got to figure out, okay, what are we going to do here? Is there room to actually have a discussion between Trump and Zelensky? And you may also, if you saw that interview with Lex Fridman, Zelensky also talked about, he asked him specifically about your relationship with Trump and how that's going to go. And you could see he was hemming and hawing and kind of talking around the edges like, well, we seem to have a pretty good relationship. I think we understand each other. You can see that it's very much at a distance, and he's talking aspirationally, what he hopes actually happens. But one of the other key areas that, so you had Zelensky, NATO is going to be part of it. And one of the other things that you heard in the so-called Kellogg Plan, which was published earlier in 2024, involved a freezing of the conflict on the current line of contact. So basically a ceasefire or a truce. And one of the other things that Sergei Lavrov has recently said is that's a non-starter too.
We cannot be satisfied with empty talk. So far, all we've heard is talk about the need to come up with some kind of truce. And it's not particularly hidden that this truce is needed in order to gain time to continue pumping weapons into Ukraine. A truce is a road to nowhere.
See, many on the Ukraine side, it's ironic. Earlier in this conflict, when the idea of a ceasefire came up, and so that we can try to find some room to have some diplomacy, it was Zelensky who kept saying no truce, no ceasefire, because all that would do is give Russia a chance to recover and to rebuild, and then they would come back later. And now then here we have what is almost certainly going to be the end state of the war, and at least the beginning of the rolling down to the ending of this thing. And now it's the Russians who say, yeah, I don't want a ceasefire. It's a road to nowhere, as Lavrov said right there, because just in reverse of what Zelensky used to say, it would help the Ukraine side, continue to get more weapons, more ammunition and training for its side. And, you'll talk for a long time. You'll be getting your stuff better. And then all of a sudden you'll say, all right, forget it. And then you'll come back onto the offensive or so. And for the Russian side, they don't want to give any chance for the Ukraine side to recover. I mean, in a sense, there are certain similarities to a sporting event. If you've got one side on the run, it's like in a basketball game, for example, if you've gotten one side and the momentum is they lost the momentum and the other side is driving in and they're scoring a bunch, the last thing you want to do is take your foot off the gas. You want to put on the full court press and to keep them frustrated, to keep them upset so they don't get the chance to recapture their wits or to get a chance to get momentum back on their side. And they want to keep on pressing that ball, driving into the paint, all that kind of stuff. That's similar to what is going on right now in this war, because Russia is on the move everywhere. The Ukraine tried to have this this mini offensive in the Kursk offensive. It's odd that they would say that, but they did try. Well, that was blunted earlier on. And then in just the last 24 hours, barely 24 hours after it started, all of a sudden Russia's making even more progress in advance to shutting down the whole Kursk salient there. The offensive itself was just petered out and just cost more men, but gained absolutely nothing, not even tactically. Meanwhile, in the east, as you may have seen, you can watch our earlier show today where we talked a little bit more about what was happening on the front lines there, especially in the key area of Pokrovsk. The Russians are making more and more advances. I saw and actually engaged with War Monitor 3, I think is his title. It's a Twitter handle of an analyst. It's pro-Ukraine. Said that he has had interactions this morning or today with somebody in the Ukraine general staff who said that they have detected 150,000, a buildup of 150,000 Russian troops in the area of the Pokrovsk beyond what's already on the front line. And so there's concerns that there could be a big push coming in there soon. As I've shown you on that map many times, that's kind of the pivot point for the entire Eastern Front. And if the Russians are to break through there in a brittle area, they could literally be rolling into the hinterland. And as also I mentioned on the earlier show today, Julian Rupka, who is one of the best analysts and people who are covering the war, journalists in that area, he also said in a video release earlier today that even in some of the areas in this area, in this part of the front, where the Ukraine side has good fortifications, they still are losing them because they don't have enough people to man them. And that's echoed by the one that we showed about 3 weeks ago that he put out, which said some of the other areas that were short of that front line also had been, some of the lead up to the Pokrovsk area had been lost without firing a shot because there were nobody to man these good fortifications. That is only continuing. That is only going to escalate. And so you can see why Russia says, we ain't taking our foot off the gas on this one. We're going to keep pressing it. No ceasefires, no NATO, none of that stuff. So now then we're going to have to figure out what is going to be left, because, folks, you can see Trump's hand, no matter how good of a negotiator is getting smaller all the time. There's not much in it. So he doesn't have a whole lot of leverage. So it's going to be pretty challenging for him to make a deal here. And I think that's one of the reasons why Kellogg was recalled, because I think the Trump team has to figure out exactly what we're going to do, because Trump doesn't want to go in there and be made a fool of. That's something he just hates more than anything. And so he's got to come up with what his plan is and what he wants to accomplish before they start making movements in that area. Okay, that's the gist, the primary thing that he talked about with the Russia-Ukraine war. But as I talked about at the beginning, this is kind of a tour de force, and there's a lot of other things that Trump said that have been in the news lately, and I want to cover some of what he said on those. One of the most interesting ones is the long time Gulf of Mexico, which everybody has known is the south of Texas, and in that body of water, Trump decided he's going to rename it.
We're going to change, because we do most of the work there and it's ours. We're going to be changing, sort of the opposite of Biden, where he's closing everything up, essentially getting rid of $50 to $60 trillion worth of assets. We're going to be changing the name of the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America, which has a beautiful ring that covers a lot of territory. The Gulf of America, what a beautiful name. And it's appropriate. It's appropriate.
I'm not sure that there's a lot of real significance in that, and the name of it. I have significant doubts that whether it's Mexico or Cuba or any of the other countries that are kind of in that region and are probably going to be free to call it whatever they want to call it. Each nation can do whatever it wants within its sphere, but that's something that Trump loves to do. He loves America, so he's just going to unilaterally change the name. And so I'm sure on the maps in the United States, you'll soon see Gulf of America. I do admit it. It sounds kind of cool. Okay, let's move on to something a little bit potentially more impactful. However, and that is, you've heard a number of things with Panama and Greenland, Panama Canal and Greenland. Trump has been in the news lately. And so, of course, that was one of the key things that a lot of the reporters were asking about. Here's what he said on the Panama Canal.
You're talking about Panama and Greenland. No, I can't assure you on either of those two. But I can say this. We need them for economic security. The Panama Canal was built for our military. I'm not going to commit to that now. It might be that you'll have to do something. Look, the Panama Canal is vital to our country. It's being operated by China. And we gave the Panama Canal to Panama. We didn't give it to China. And they've abused it. They've abused that gift. It should have never been made, by the way.
Okay, so that's interesting. If I could understand correctly, the question in that kind of in the middle there, someone said, will you commit to not using force to retake the canal? And he's like, oh, I'm not going to commit to anything. Maybe we will. Maybe we won't. That's something that Trump has been known for, is that he likes to be ambiguous and likes to be uncertain, likes that madman kind of view where, the idea that you act crazy sometimes in public so that the other side doesn't know whether you're mean it or not. And they may be more resident or hesitant to take any action or so. We'll see what he means. But the comment that, now China runs it. China doesn't run it per se. In fact, it's still run by Panama. What he's referring to is that the ports on either side of the canal are currently run by a Hong Kong company, which is quasi-China. They call it China, but it's some kind of independent nation, an independent entity. But it's not even the government of Hong Kong. It's a company that's in there. The Panama still has control over everything. A company doesn't, but they have the locks there. And so Trump is concerned that, maybe China will tell the Hong Kong companies to do something. But see, the problem is that there is no military component there. There's no like Hong Kong military. There's no Chinese PLA there. So, a company can say, yes, we're going to shut something down, but they have no power to enforce it. So the Panamanian government can simply come in, or, God forbid that they actually did try to somehow stop commerce without military power. Obviously, we could rectify that in short order. But there's no evidence that these companies have any intention whatsoever of interdicting any traffic. So not really clear what his motivation is on there. I don't know if he has information that we don't have in the public domain, but from what we do have, I'm not really sure why he has chosen, this time to raise this issue, and when it's really never been raised by Trump before to such an extent here. But that's kind of his view. He's liking to say, yeah, maybe we will have to do something. Maybe we won't. Who knows? But it's just interesting that he's bandying that about. We have a similar situation on the Greenland issue. And just kind of so you're aware, Greenland has a strategic position because it's up near the Arctic, of course. And you have, all major powers, U.S., China, Russia, all have access around that. And they're all in close proximity there up in the top part of the world. And so there are some strategic interests at play. We'll see how Trump views it. Check this out.
Well, we need Greenland for national security purposes. I've been told that for a long time, long before I even ran. I mean, people have been talking about it for a long time. You have approximately 45,000 people there. People really don't even know if Denmark has any legal right to it. But if they do, they should give it up because we need it for national security. That's for the free world. I'm talking about protecting the free world. You don't even need binoculars. You look outside, you have China ships all over the place. You have Russian ships all over the place. We're not letting that happen. We're not letting it happen. And if Denmark wants to get to a conclusion, but nobody knows if they even have any right, title, or interest. The people are going to probably vote for independence or to come into the United States. But if they did do that, then I would tariff Denmark at a very high level.
Yeah, I'm not really sure what he's gotten his dander up on this issue of Greenland. And when he makes that statement, at least in the context of what he said there, he was talking about you can see Russia and China ships, and we're not going to let that happen. I'm not sure what he means by that, because that's just the Arctic. All nations have ships that can freely transit that area. It's international waters, and even if you own Greenland, you're clearly not going to stop any country from transiting international waters. I mean, you can't. It's against international law, and you also physically can, unless you want to go to war with China and Russia, and there'd be no value in doing that. So again, it's not clear what his motivation is, or why is he questioning whether Denmark actually has control over the island, and talking about the people wanting to vote to come in and become part of the United States. Yeah, I don't see that happening again. And listen, a lot of this stuff we can just kind of slough off and say, well, that's just Trump being Trump. But we do have to be concerned, because those are some pretty alarming statements, and it has a lot of people in the world concerned, and unnecessarily concerned. You can make a theoretical case that, the crazy man theory, whatever, especially on an adversary, you don't know whether they're going to do this or not, so it might constrain their behavior. But nobody's threatening to shut down the Panama Canal. Nobody is threatening to do anything counter to the United States in the Greenland area. Yeah, in the Greenland area, that the Russia and China or any other nation up there, that transits those waters would be doing. There's nothing to stop, and there's no apparent threat to the United States that's geographically centered anywhere on Greenland. And we're an Arctic nation as well. We have access. We have our own ships up in there. We have air power up in those areas. And listen, we need to do, like we do everywhere else. Our objective should be to keep the global commons open, the air paths, the sea lanes for global transport. Anybody can use them. Anybody, even Russia and China. That's just how it has to be. It's either a global commons that it's free for everybody, or it's not free for everybody. And then of course, you're going to make a lot of problems for yourself if you want to try to start constraining that. And I assure you, you don't want to go down a path to where you give not uncertainty in perhaps self-constrained areas, but then you start giving fear to other countries, and now they may be saying, hang on, they may be taking proactive measures that are not ultimately good for our interest. And so we have to be really careful here, and Trump has to be careful how far he goes in these areas beyond rhetoric, because if any actions start taking place, then there is, like always, folks, there's an action and there's a counteraction. And it's long gone are the days, and they didn't last very long, maybe a handful of years after the Soviet Union dissolved in the early 1990s. And for a short period of time, it was the unipolar moment where we had complete and total domination economically, militarily, and diplomatically around the world, and could literally do anything we wanted. Those days came to an end in the early 2000s, and they are way gone today, that we can just tell people what's going to happen. So we have to be careful that we don't continue to take actions. And listen, this whole Russia-Ukraine war is probably an outcropping of that, because we just bullheadedly for many administrations in the United States said we're going to bring Ukraine and Georgia at the time into NATO, even though Russia was warning against it, even though there was no military utility in doing so. Would have gained nothing to have those two countries in our alliance at all, only increased risk. But for some foolish reason, we bullheadedly kept going through there, and there was a counteraction. That's just the truth of it. You don't have to like it. You don't have to defend it. You don't have to say it was right or wrong. It doesn't matter. You took an action. They took a counteraction. That's just how the world works. It's the way we work. When people do things that we don't like, we take counteractions. We don't sit there and just take it. We do what we can in that area, and others are going to do the same. And if we don't want the negative counteractions, then we just don't need to take the initial actions, especially when it doesn't benefit us to do so, as was the case in the NATO. Let's don't create problems where there aren't any, and there don't need to be any in situations like this. The last thing I want to talk about here today, or show you a little bit of what he said, because it's going to have some real implications in the Middle East, and that has to do with the situation in Gaza.
Do I have to define it for you? Look, all hell will break out. If those hostages aren't back, I don't want to hurt your negotiation. If they're not back by the time I get into office, all hell will break out in the Middle East. And it will not be good for Hamas, and it will not be good, frankly, for anyone. All hell will break out. I don't have to say anymore, but that's what it is. And they should have given them back a long time. They should have never taken them.
Yeah, listen, I don't know what he means by that. I mean, gee whiz, all you got to do is look at any of the latest film or headlines from the Gaza Strip, and it's honestly hard to understand how it could be any more hell than it already is. I mean, it is a literal hellscape. Hardly any buildings are left, and entire sections of cities have been reduced to complete rubble or dust. Tens of thousands, scores of thousands of people have been killed. Hundreds of thousands more have been wounded. Millions have been made homeless. Virtually the entirety of the Gaza Strip has been made homeless. Only a handful of people, a relative handful, still live in their original homes. Very, very few. And even then, the quality of life is basically non-existent. And you want to make it more hell? Look, if being a hellscape and bringing hell onto Hamas would have released the hostages, that would have happened a long, long time ago. And so for Trump to come in now, I don't know what he means by that. I mean, we don't have any military forces engaged in this area at all. This is purely on the Israeli Defense Forces, and already they are routinely condemned by many in the world for the overuse of military force in the Gaza Strip. I mean, literally pummeling the cities into dust. I don't know how you could even do more. So it's unclear what he means. And if he makes this big, brash statement, and then he comes into office, but nothing changes, nothing happens differently, then, it doesn't really make him look very credible. And if the hostages don't come back, at his insistences, then that's going to further diminish his stature. So I think I hope that he kind of changes course in between now and then, because I don't think it's going to be a positive thing for the president if the hostages don't magically show up. And I'll just tell you, after all of this time, if the hostages are not going to come back because of more threats, look, they've already endured everything humanly possible that could be thrown on people, both the Palestinian people as well as whatever's left of Hamas, the people that are still holding those hostages, however many of them may still be alive. And if you want to get them back, you're going to have to give something. Just threatening to kill everyone isn't going to work. It would already have worked, because believe me, Netanyahu's been trying that exact same thing for the duration of this, whatever it is, around 15 months now, war. It hasn't worked up to this point. It won't work when Trump comes in. And then what also would he bring American military power to bear? Would he bring, F-16s or F-18s or anything else from the sea, or American missiles? I mean, would he start actually adding into it? I don't know, because you saw they tried to pin him down on that and ask him what he meant by that, and he wasn't going to say. But without changing the nature of what we do, without going to diplomacy, those hostages, whether American or Israeli or any other nationality, aren't coming back alive or any other way. So if we want those hostages to come back, I'm afraid the president's going to have to try a different track and observe what hasn't worked, and then we'll see what does. But that's the gist of what he had today. I think the other thing that he was asking on, we don't have a clip on right now, is whether he would do anything with Iran, because you saw with our show with Doug McGregor earlier, that's one thing he's concerned about from yesterday, that McGregor is concerned that the Israelis may try to do something in between now and 20 January to kind of box Trump in, so that they have to have war, because Trump doesn't want a war. So if something breaks out on Biden's watch before Trump comes in, then when he assumes office, then he just gets whatever's left over. So there's some concern on that. So they asked him what he would do on that, and he basically just said, I'm not going to tell you. I'm not going to signal ahead of time what I would do on a certain situation. But obviously it is very much on his radar, and we'll certainly be keeping a close tabs on that as well. Well, listen, that's all we have for you today. That was a kind of a tour de force around the world of what Trump has to say today, and is a foretaste of probably what's to come. And if I think some of those things are a little bit outlandish while he's just doing a press conference, just imagine when he has the reins of power in his hands. And and whenever that happens, you can count on Daniel Davis Deep Dive to give you the no kidding bottom line, what they say, what they do, and what it means, because we are unintimidated and uncompromised to bring you the truth, no matter what it is, no matter who's in office. That's what we exist for, to give you the bottom line scoop. Thank you very much. We'll see you on the next episode of Daniel Davis Deep Dive.